On the day I was diagnosed with stomach cancer, his first love announced her pregnancy on Instagram. Harlan rushed home to sign the divorce agreement, but my diagnosis certificate was carelessly tossed to the ground by him. "Selena, don't you think this pathetic attempt to win me back is unnecessary?" The divorce papers I had prepared caught Harlan's eye, along with my diagnosis certificate. "Selena, don't use such a lame trick," Harlan said, casually throwing the paper on the floor. "I've been using you, and my feelings for you were all fake." "I know," I replied softly, my stomach cramping painfully. The moment he testified against my father and when Wendy, his first love, told me it was my dad who ruined their family, I had already figured it out. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again." "Just pretend you didn't see it," I said, tucking away my diagnosis certificate and handing him the pen. "Isn't a few million for Mr. Harlan a fair deal for the divorce?" I couldn't defend my dad's actions. But Harlan had deceived me for a decade, he must be worth something. That day I visited my dad, he looked completely worn out. He said, "Don't blame Harlan. It's all my fault for being greedy. Just make sure to live well with him and visit me often." I held back my tears, forcing them back from my eyes. I said okay. I promised my dad I would live well, I needed to focus on my treatment and survive, hoping to stay behind him. Harlan's cold laugh pulled me back to reality. "A few million? Will that even cover the debts he left?" Harlan opened the divorce agreement and began reading it carefully. "Do you want me to contact a lawyer to make some changes?" Each word felt like an ice cube, coldly striking my heart. "I know my dad has wronged you and many others. You don't have to repay those." My hand holding the paper curled up, crumpling the edge, sweat from my palm slowly soaking through. "This money buys my 10 years of marriage, it's enough." "Fine." Harlan nodded, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold as ice. For 10 years, he had played his role well, letting me express my emotions without restraint. He always carefully considered my feelings, his gaze gentle as ever for the past decade. This was the first time I saw him angry, the veins on the back of his hands bulging, the pen in his grip almost breaking in half. Harlan quickly signed the papers, his handwriting hasty and messy, every stroke forceful as if trying to tear through the paper. "This house was our wedding gift from my dad, I plan to sell it to pay some of his debts. I packed your things, they're in those big boxes, including the gifts you gave me." As I spoke, I inadvertently looked down and saw the small patch on my ring finger, a different color from the rest of my hand, where my wedding ring used to be. When Harlan proposed, he said once I wore it, I'd be tied to him for life. I had tearfully replied that a lifetime was too short, I wanted it for the next life too. But there wouldn't be 2 lifetimes or even one, we only had 10 years. 10 years felt fleeting to me, but to Harlan, it might have been an eternity. "You." I was interrupted by Harlan. "You packed up so quickly, how could you act so scatterbrained before?" One sentence can have different meanings based on tone, and Harlan's clearly carried a hint of sarcasm. I used to be forgetful, and Harlan had organized everything in the house meticulously. I smiled faintly. "It hasn't been long, it's been 2 months since my dad went to prison, Mr. Harlan. During those 2 months, he hadn't come home, but I could see his updates on Wendy's Instagram. I also knew it was Wendy who wanted me to see them. As for why I had her texts, it was because she was Harlan's secretary. 3 years into Harlan's job, she barged into our lives. Pretending to be my good friend, she would send me dozens of texts daily about Harlan's work life, leaving me completely unsuspecting. Unbeknownst to me, everything was meant for me to see." Harlan's pupils contracted, his mouth set in silence. When it comes to pretending, Mr. Harlan is clearly better at it. I tried to keep a smile on my face, fighting back tears. Harlan's tall figure leaned in closer, the scent of nicotine flooding my senses. "Pregnant women shouldn't breathe in secondhand smoke. Think of Miss Wendy, smoke less," I said, pushing him away with my hand on his chest. Wendy's latest Instagram post was a photo of a pregnancy test. At that moment, I was holding the freshly printed divorce agreement, its warmth contrasting with my icy hands and feet. I thought I should like that post. Harlan didn't expect my sudden move, stumbling back a couple of steps before regaining his balance. His eyes flashed with surprise, but quickly returned to their usual coldness. "Weren't you selling the house? I'll offer 10% above market value, you sell it to me, and you leave." With that, I was the one left in shock. I didn't understand why Harlan was being so petty, perhaps he had too much money to spend. I didn't need to fight with money, so I nodded. But before we draft the contract, you need to move out first. I'll call the lawyer right now, draft the sale contract immediately, and send you the money. You move out. Harlan suddenly seemed like a petulant child, emphasizing the words, you move, heavily. He was angry, but I found his determination quite appealing. I nodded again. You handle it, I have an appointment this afternoon. As I said that, I began to gather my belongings. Honestly, there wasn't much left, aside from the things I gave Harlan and what he gave me. I had already decluttered once out of urgency. The moment I closed the suitcase, the house sale contract arrived. As I signed it, I caught my relieved smile in the mirror, and when I looked up, I met Harlan's gaze, startled by the darkness on his face. On impulse, I said, "Pleasure working with you." As I was leaving, a large box flew past me toward the trash bin in the hallway. The loud crash startled me, and before I could recover, another box flew into the bin. I didn't need to look back to know it was Harlan behind me. He was throwing out the trash, one box containing the things he had given me, the other box filled with what I had given him. Coming back to reality, I didn't look back and stepped into the elevator. But strangely, until the elevator doors closed, I didn't hear the sound of a door shutting behind me. Harlan's money arrived quickly, as if he was even more eager than I was to end our relationship. But unexpectedly, we met that afternoon at the hospital's obstetrics and gynecology department. One of the victims from years ago had just given birth. Due to the baby's position, they would face expensive medical bills. I hoped to help them out, of course. I also hoped they could say a word or two on behalf of my dad. Her husband said she refused to see me and, since she had just given birth, was emotionally unstable, wishing I wouldn't show up in front of them again. Disheartened, I left the obstetrics department, only to bump into a couple, Harlan and Wendy. Their shocked expressions mirrored my own. I had no intention of embarrassing myself, so I planned to pretend I didn't see them and quickened my pace to walk past. As I brushed past, my wrist was suddenly gripped, a large palm pressing against me, warm and slightly damp. My forward movement was halted, and my heart squeezed tight. I looked up in fear, meeting Harlan's bloodshot eyes, the smell of nicotine even stronger than this morning, making me feel dizzy. How strong was his addiction? I couldn't stand the smell of smoke. When my dad occasionally craved a cigarette, he would hide in the bathroom to smoke. But with Harlan for the past decade, I hadn't even tasted nicotine's bitterness during our kisses. He truly was able to hold it in. I had made it quite hard on him over these 10 years. The pain in my wrist quickly pushed my inner self-mockery aside as Harlan's voice reached my ears. "Why are you here?" I looked up and met his gaze. He seemed to be struggling to control his emotions. But all I felt at that moment was embarrassment and confusion. "Our marriage is over. I don't owe you any explanation about my whereabouts." I didn't want to show my disheveled self to Harlan and Wendy, so I tightened my grip on my handbag, my nails digging into my palm. "Are you pregnant?" Harlan stepped closer, and suddenly the distance between us shrank, the hot breath of nicotine enveloping us. Wendy's eyes widened in shock, and she bit her lip in frustration. I couldn't help but chuckle softly, lowering my head to pry Harlan's fingers off one by one. "Mr. Harlan, you're thinking too much. Your precautions have always been effective. Years ago, I did think about having a child, but every time I brought it up with Harlan, he'd say his company was just starting up, and if we had a baby too soon, he wouldn't have time to be there." I remembered my dad often missing my school events because of work, and I thought Harlan made a good point. After a few discussions, I came around to his way of thinking. So I hadn't mentioned it in years, hoping Harlan's company would get on track soon. If I had a child with him, it would tie him down for life. And that child would forever be a barrier between him and Wendy. Those excuses were just delaying tactics to keep me from having a child with him. He and Wendy had been together for 2 months, and she was already pregnant. It showed that he wasn't worried about a child lacking a father, he just didn't want one with me. As soon as the words left my mouth, a crack appeared on Harlan's face. "Selena, don't lie to me," he gritted out. "I have no reason to lie to you." The strong scent of nicotine made me wince slightly, and I took 2 steps back to widen the distance between us. Wendy looked at Harlan, her face gradually paling. "Then why are you at the obstetrics and gynecology department?" he asked, pointing at the sign above the door. It dawned on me that he was still wearing the watch I had given him. It was a birthday gift from our wedding year. But I had clearly put that watch in a box, which Harlan had thrown in the trash this morning. So I leaned towards the possibility that I had seen wrong. One of the victims is here, I came to visit. Does that answer satisfy you, Mr. Harlan? I didn't understand why he had to pressure me like this, why he needed me to expose my scars for him to see. But I knew that if I didn't clarify today, I might not be able to leave. Neither Harlan nor Wendy would allow the possibility of my pregnancy to exist. I fought back the tears welling up, forcing a strained smile onto my face. This time, they didn't stop me from leaving. 3 days later, I visited some families my dad had hurt in the past and returned to the hospital for a follow-up. Your current condition is stage 2 cancer. With aggressive treatment, there's a good chance for recovery, the doctor, a man my age named Lewis, said. For some reason, his name sounded familiar, but I couldn't recall where I'd heard it. My stomach began to cramp again, and when I stood up, my legs felt like they were sinking into cotton, weak and unsteady. I felt a bit dizzy, and as I came back to my senses, he grasped my arm, steadying me. You look really pale, Lewis said. I recommend you get admitted as soon as possible. Let's wait a bit longer, I have a few things to finish first. I wanted to visit all the victim families. I hoped to make amends for my dad and to wait for his verdict before I got hospitalized. Selena, don't be stubborn. As long as you're alive, there's hope, he said, directly calling my name for the first time, catching me off guard. I met his serious gaze, but quickly looked away. Just give me a few more days. I want to wait for my dad's verdict, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, sapping my strength. After a moment, Lewis replied, okay. I'm off work too, where do you live? I'll give you a ride, he said before I could respond. No need. I waved my hand weakly. I can go back on my own. With your condition, how can you go home by yourself? Lewis sighed. Miss Selena, I don't want you to joke with your life. He was serious, like a teacher reprimanding a troublesome student. Reluctantly, I nodded. After my checkup, I had seen Lewis a few times. There wasn't much to say, and we rode in silence. Until he parked in the underground garage of my apartment complex, and as he stepped out, headlights from a car across the way flashed at me, blinding me for a few seconds. When I could see again, I realized it was Harlan's car parked right in front of me. He was already approaching. With a loud bang, Lewis was knocked to the ground, a bright red stain appearing on his lip. My mind was a mess. I couldn't grasp why Harlan was here and why he had attacked Lewis. I hurriedly pushed Harlan away and helped Lewis up. What are you doing? Harlan's gaze could kill, his rage palpable in his eyes. What are you doing? He pointed at Lewis, and this time, I clearly saw the watch on his wrist. The band was engraved with the initials SY, there was no doubt it was the one I had given him. Bringing another man home the day of our divorce, Selena, if you're cheating during marriage, I think our divorce agreement should be invalidated. Harlan's words dripped with fury. Lewis instinctively moved to shield me, but Harlan was quicker, grabbing me first. I scoffed, raising my hand to slap him. The sharp sound echoed in the garage, and Harlan's face quickly swelled. He turned his head back in surprise, clearly caught off guard by my slap. Harlan, have you lost your mind? My palm burned from the impact, trembling from the force. The child in Wendy's belly is yours, isn't it? After all these years in the company, you know what you've been doing behind my back. If we're going to count who cheated first, you'd probably be the one leaving empty-handed. My face burned with shame as I felt myself yelling, tears streaming down uncontrollably. It was humiliating. Especially in front of Lewis, an outsider. To my surprise, Harlan laughed. What if I told you that Wendy and I have never been intimate? Today, when she went to the hospital, she said the pregnancy test in the photo isn't hers? Harlan's gaze fell on Lewis as he leaned in. And what about you? His words were like a bombshell, shattering all my previous assumptions and leaving me confused. I didn't understand why he was acting this way. One moment he was agreeing to divorce and tossing out everything that held our memories. The next he was furious and confronting me about my relationship with Lewis. Is Mr. Harlan okay? Lewis spoke first, wiping the blood from his lip with a tissue. I think you're mistaken, my relationship with Miss Selena is purely that of doctor and patient. I'm concerned about her health and offered to drive her home. I also hope Mr. Harlan can manage his emotions and think twice before acting. Since you've already divorced, there's no need to linger. If you want to reconcile, don't use such an aggressive approach, Lewis added, exchanging a look with me. Miss Selina, remember to check in on time for your hospitalization. Take care. Goodbye. I felt a pang of guilt as I nodded at him. I'm really sorry about today. He smiled gently, his expression light. Don't blame yourself. Harlan seemed lost in thought after Lewis's words, unable to respond for a long time. I couldn't be bothered to argue with him anymore and walked straight toward the elevator entrance. Behind me, I heard hurried footsteps. Selina, is that report real? Harlan caught up to me, pushing shut the door I had just opened. I looked up, meeting his dazed gaze. Does this have anything to do with you? I asked. Weren't you just here to catch me in the act so you could kick me out with nothing? Just like this morning, Harlan still couldn't bring himself to believe that report. But this time, there was no disdain, just disbelief. Selina, it's not like that. He scratched the back of his head in frustration, then, as if something clicked, he grabbed my hands. The reason I came here was because Morton just told me he's planning to sell all his shares. And he also told me that the initial investment actually came from you. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret and helplessness. Why? He asked. Because back then, I loved you. When you care about someone, you only think about their happiness. You don't want to see them crushed by hardships or mired in sadness. So back then, I put up all my savings and asked Morton to play along with the act. Knowing Harlan's pride, I didn't intend to ever let him know the truth. Even when I needed to sell my shares to pay off my father's debt, I never asked Morton to tell him the real reason. I hadn't expected that Harlan would still find out. I said back then, Mr. Harlan, so don't get the wrong idea. I tried to pull my hands free, but he only held them tighter. And now, he asked, his anger transforming into a fierce determination. Now? I don't love you anymore. If he never loved me, then why should I keep loving him? Harlan's eyes flickered, as if he had been stung, a faint shimmer pooling at the corners. Why? His voice softened. You used to love me so much. Why would you just end things like this? He pulled me close, his scent of nicotine overwhelming. Harlan, don't you find this ridiculous? I had enough. I kicked his knee hard. Harlan bent over in pain but kept his grip on me. Selina, can we start over? He looked up, his eyes faintly glistening. You had so many chances to say that, I replied. After my father's accident, before you testified in court, 2 whole months passed. You spent that time getting cozy with Wendy, without a single explanation to me. Do you think we can just start over? I only see Wendy as a sister, he said, his voice weak and unconvincing. Well, she clearly doesn't see you as a brother. Her every Instagram post proves that. I fired back. I didn't know about her posts. I don't care, Harlan. Some things can't be undone. We should end this while we both still have some dignity left. Selina, these past 2 months, I've been thinking about how to win you back. His voice trailed off as his phone rang, and my hands were freed. Harlan pulled out his phone, and Wendy flashed across the screen. In one breath, he was professing his feelings, in the next, he answered Wendy's call without hesitation. At this point, I couldn't tell which of his words were true and which were lies. Wendy, I'm in the middle of something. What? His expression shifted. Stay right there, don't do anything rash. I watched as his brow furrowed and he rose swiftly from his seat. So even deep emotions can wear 2 faces. I stifled a bitter laugh, brushing him off and entering the elevator quickly. The soft ding finally eased my heart. But my phone buzzed with a message from Harlan, I'll come pick you up tomorrow morning. Wait for me. I laughed without a sound, blocking his number. That night, I checked into the hospital. It was partly to avoid Harlan, and partly because Lewis, after discussing it with me, thought it best I start my stay early. He'd assess my condition before approving any outings. But the next morning, the one waiting for me wasn't Harlan, it was Wendy. I agreed to see Wendy because she claimed Harlan had asked her to handle the property transfer with me. But what I didn't expect was her opening line, sorry, I was feeling down last night, so Harlan stayed with me. She was fully dressed up, immaculate from head to toe, her expression smug. But no amount of concealer could fully cover the dark circles under her eyes. Maybe those dark circles hid a different kind of secret. I mentally chided myself for overthinking. It's fine. I should thank you for getting him off my back. My calm demeanor caught her off guard. She dropped the pretense, cutting straight to the chase. Selena, even if I wasn't actually pregnant, Harlan still cares more about me than anyone. Don't think you can win him back by getting pregnant in secret. With that, she threw a card onto the table. There's $5 million on that card. Let go of the baby. If your father manages to survive prison, this money will let him live comfortably. Wendy looked at me haughtily, still oblivious to her own absurdity. Harlan was right, Wendy wasn't pregnant. But her words made it clear that Harlan had condoned her behavior. And the password? Wendy's voice pulled me back. She sneered, it's 180907. That was the day Harlan flew halfway across the world to save me. September 7, 2018, the day Harlan changed his flight and cut our honeymoon short. His excuse back then was that the company had an urgent situation he needed to handle personally. Maybe it was his stellar acting, or maybe I just trusted Wendy too much, but I never questioned it. I remember my wedding day, with Wendy standing as my bridesmaid. I had personally placed the bouquet in her hands, wishing her sincerely, I hope you'll find your happiness soon. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she accepted it, her tears streaming down her face. I thought she was genuinely happy for me. But looking back, seeing the one you love forced to marry someone else must have been heartbreaking. During our honeymoon, Wendy had been reaching out to Harlan intermittently. Each time, he would step away to take her calls. I was so at ease back then, I hadn't thought twice about it. The last call came in urgently. I was just inches away from kissing Harlan when the ringtone interrupted us. The name Wendy flashed on the screen, and he instinctively stepped back to answer. The voice on the other end was loud enough for me to faintly hear her sobs. Lost in the bliss of the moment, I hadn't suspected anything. My first thought was that there must be a major issue at the company, one Wendy couldn't handle on her own. After all, she'd been calling more frequently recently. Sure enough, 30 minutes later, Harlan approached me with a look of guilt. Sorry, there's an emergency at work, so I'm heading back tonight. I'll go with you. I promised I'd give you a full month here. Don't you think leaving so soon is a bit abrupt? He was the picture of sincerity, his eyes filled with apology as he reached out to ruffle my hair. I took his hand, holding it. Honeymoons are meant for two people, aren't they? It wouldn't be any fun alone. Besides, if we go back separately, Dad will think we fought, and there's no need to make him worry. A faint smile appeared on Harlan's lips. He nodded, all right. Even though I had rebooked my ticket, Harlan didn't come home with me after we landed. He, thoughtful as he was, called 2 cars, one for me to go home and one that he claimed was going back to the office. Only now did I realize his final destination was actually Wendy's house. Memories played back in my mind. I'm not pregnant, and I don't want your money. Selena. Wendy interrupted, standing up while bracing herself on the table. You're still lying, aren't you? If you're not pregnant, why did Harlan pull strings to get your report? Wendy's words hit me hard, causing a jolt through my body. What? Selena, do you know what I hate the most? It's your clueless act. Deep down, you're just as calculating as I am, aren't you? Wendy's expression darkened. Mr. Harlan, hello. I heard you donated $3,600,000 to the Cancer Foundation. Is that true? Yes, because my wife was recently diagnosed with cancer. I hope to accumulate some good karma for her and wish all patients can be proactive in their treatment and not give up. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from the restaurant's TV, and both Wendy and I turned to look. It was Harlan, smiling at the camera. Whether intentional or not, he was spinning the wedding ring on his finger, something he should have taken off long ago. Mr. Harlan and his wife really seem to be in love. I heard you two have been together since college to wedding bells. Can you share your love story? The host's smile was practically stretching to the heavens. Harlan's ears flushed slightly, and he began to spin his wedding ring faster, inadvertently revealing his tension. Isn't today's interview focused on our new product? He glanced at the smart appliances nearby. Oh right. So, Mr. Harlan, what inspired you to design this voice-activated, fully automated vacuum cleaner? The smile in Harlan's eyes gradually returned. Because my wife often says, if only there was a way to do housework with one button, or one button for a bath would be great. So, I wanted to surprise her, letting her relax at home. Our entire suite of smart appliances can be controlled by voice and adjust settings according to user preferences. The host smiled even wider. Even when the topic changes, it still revolves around Mrs. Fu. The implication in the trailing tone made Harlan's ears turn redder, but ironically, in the 10 years I'd been with him, I had never seen him like this. The man I loved for a decade now felt so unfamiliar to me. More ironically, he seemed to have learned to love me only after I had left. Wendy's face lost color as despair took over. She collapsed back into her seat, tears spilling over and cracking her delicate makeup. It's all your fault. Harlan was mine. It's because of you that he changed his heart. She cried softly, the arrogance she had moments ago completely gone, leaving behind a heartbroken woman. I lowered my eyes and slid the bank card in front of her. I left the restaurant. Once in the car, I pulled Harlan's number out of the blacklist and dialed him. Before the beeping sound could finish, his voice came through, "Selena, you finally found me." His tone was high with unhidden joy. "I just finished a live interview. Can I come find you this afternoon? You said you wanted to change the furniture in the house, right? I picked out some options, but you blocked me after I texted you. I'll send you a message later. I saw on your social media that you saved videos of seafood mukbangs. I had someone buy your favorite shrimp. Do you want it spicy or steamed tonight? I saw some fresh lobsters too." Harlan. I raised my voice slightly, cutting through his continuous chatter. "We've already started the divorce application process. You signed the divorce agreement yourself, don't forget. And if you want to play the role of the devoted husband, don't waste your energy on me. Don't try to grab my attention with these cheap tactics. I don't want to be in the public eye, and I certainly don't want my situation to affect my dad's judgment." The word cheap made his breath hitch on the other end of the line, reminiscent of the time he had called my examination report poor. After submitting the divorce application, there's a 3-month cooling-off period. Can you give me this 3 months? Harlan's voice came through after a long silence. No need. I'll be in the hospital for these 3 months unless something unexpected happens. I hope our communication is limited to matters related to the divorce from now on. Before Harlan could respond again, I quickly hung up. But that night, he showed up at my hospital bed, carrying various lunch boxes, drenched in sweat. "I couldn't find you at home this morning, and I had a live interview in the afternoon. That's why I'm here now," Harlan said, his breathing uneven. "These are all your favorites." As he opened the boxes, the aroma filled the hospital room, even drawing the attention of the patient in the next bed. He didn't meet my gaze, lowering his head to put on gloves and start peeling shrimp for me. The lunch boxes were still warm, and I could see his fingertips reddened by the heat through the transparent gloves. Harlan was allergic to seafood, so I hadn't eaten it much since we got together, let alone asked him to prepare it for me. It was the first time he had gone this far for me. Turns out Harlan could truly love someone this selflessly. "I have an exam tomorrow and already ate, so I need to fast before the test." "You can take it back," I said quietly, not wanting to cause a scene in front of the other patients. Harlan paused, and the shrimp jumped back into the box. "Okay." He raised his head, suppressing all his bitterness, and, just like before, with a slight smile asked, "What do you want to eat after the exam?" "I'll prepare it." He glanced around. "It's not convenient to share a room. Should I help you apply for a single room?" I spoke to a specialist, and as long as you actively treat after surgery, the chances of recurrence are low. "How about I arrange everything for you?" I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "No, I just want to quietly stay here and receive treatment. I saw Wendy yesterday." As soon as he said that, I noticed his pupils constrict. I really only see her as a sister. Our parents died in an accident when we were young, and we've relied on each other through childhood. I've always helped her, but it's just help. I made it clear yesterday that I have no other feelings for her. Harlan took off his disposable gloves and reached for me, but I avoided him. His hand awkwardly hung in the air, uncertain. You changed your ticket to go back early during your honeymoon because of her, didn't you? Harlan choked up and retracted his hand stiffly. Yes. He avoided my gaze. But it was her mother's birthday. She was feeling down, and I couldn't just not go back. I sighed heavily. It was the same yesterday, right? Whenever Wendy was upset, no matter the reason, Harlan would rush to her side immediately. Yes, he didn't offer further explanation. Back then, he would rush to her without hesitation. Now, trying to win me back, he still would. Wendy loves you, and she holds an important place in your heart. You can't let her go. Just based on that, there's no way we can get back together. I pointed out this issue, watching Harlan's eyes gradually dim. Selena, he looked deep into my eyes. I made it clear to her last night that we won't be in touch anymore. I know you can't forgive me, but I just want to do something for you, really. Harlan, who was always proud and unyielding, bowed his head in front of me for the second time. The only thing you can do is to stop seeing each other. I once thought the man who loved me most was just acting for revenge against my father, putting on a show for 10 years. Every time we met, I replayed those 10 years we spent together in my mind. Each time, without fail, it reminded me that all his thoughtful gestures, his deep affections, even his every action and expression, were all fake. I didn't blame him, but I could no longer love him. After a long pause, he reluctantly said, "Okay." I packed up my lunchbox, turned around, and left. Each movement seemed to stretch infinitely, even my silhouette felt elongated, as if revealing the owner's thoughts. Harlan didn't go back on his word, he really didn't show up again. But for every meal, the food he made never missed a day. Each dish was something I loved to eat. When the nurses brought it in, they couldn't hide their envy. They thought I was just arguing with Harlan and always encouraged me to reconcile. On our wedding anniversary, he sent me a bouquet of flowers. 99 roses, topped with a pink card, just like when he proposed to me. I took a quick glance and tossed the flowers into the trash, while the card with my name was torn to shreds. The next day, a lost and found news story shocked the city. It was a somewhat wilted bouquet, and of course, throwing away flowers wasn't unusual. What was surprising was that hidden among the flowers was a valuable diamond ring. The news camera even gave a close-up of the ring, clearly showing the inscription on the bottom, Selena. High-end jewelry is rare, and with the name engraved on it, finding the owner wouldn't be difficult. This incident first made the news, then went viral online. Soon, attentive netizens discovered that this lost wedding ring was a pair with the one Harlan wore during a recent live interview. From there, they connected the dots, uncovering my name and the fact that I was in the process of divorcing Harlan. The one-sided truth left infinite space for speculation, and quickly, the story between Harlan and me transformed into that of a cancer-stricken wife who didn't want to hurt her loving husband, who bravely sought a divorce. Unbeknownst to her, the husband was determined to accompany his wife through this difficult time. In no time, this interpretation flooded the internet, with countless voices urging us to reconcile. Louis learned of this right away and had the hospital lock down the news, ensuring that my hospitalization wouldn't leak. Thank you. After hearing Louis's arrangements, I let out a sigh of relief. You're about to have surgery, so you can't let your emotions fluctuate too much. The media will do anything for attention, and I'm just doing what a doctor should do, Louis smiled. By the way, the meals he sends are quite good, nutritious, and really suitable for you, Louis added. I didn't expect Dr. Louis to not only perform surgeries, but also check up on the leftovers from patients. You must be really busy. I hadn't eaten a single bite of the food Harlan sent because I knew that if I did, I'd have to go back. I texted Harlan every day, warning him not to send food anymore. But he ignored me each time, repeatedly sending a message, "How are you today? What do you want to eat?" I was screaming on one end while he remained oblivious on the other. My suggestion is serious, Louis pushed up his glasses. During treatment, you'll have to endure some discomfort. Plus, you've noticed you've lost a lot of weight, right? Louis's brows furrowed slightly, his tone becoming serious. Eating well might help you feel a little better. In this relationship, he's in the wrong, you shouldn't torment yourself over it, Selena. He sat at the edge of my bed, looking into my eyes, and during this time, I really think he cares about you. You're acting as his advocate? I laughed in frustration. It seemed the one-sided news really swayed people's hearts. Harlan even moved Louis. Doctors shouldn't interfere in their patients' personal matters, but this is also a burden on your mind, isn't it? Louis pointed at my stomach. This kind of pain I can help you with. Then he pointed to my heart, but this kind of pain you have to deal with on your own. Louis's words were light, but each one hit home. He was right, I was indeed avoiding it. I had always sailed smoothly through life. Until my father was arrested, and Harlan's lies unfolded before me. All the blows came rushing in. And then there was my illness. If it weren't for my promise to my dad, maybe one day during that period, I would have left this world. Do you want me to go see Harlan? Louis replied, he's actually outside right now. If you don't want to see him, I can send him away immediately. I'll go out to see him. I sighed and got up to head to the bathroom. In the mirror, I indeed looked much thinner, just as Louis had said. My eye sockets were slightly sunken, my complexion was yellowish, and I seemed lifeless. But I didn't want to put on makeup anymore. When I used to go on dates with Harlan, I would plan my outfits the day before and start my skincare and makeup hours in advance. Now, I felt dead inside, my appearance didn't seem so important anymore. Harlan arrived, just like last time, carrying several lunch boxes and tightly holding a velvet ring box. When Harlan saw me, his eyes suddenly turned red, and his trembling hand reached out, but he pulled back just a centimeter away, wiping away the tears from the corners of his eyes. I heard you were looking for me? I've taken down the trending topic, and I've got the ring back. He nodded, looking down, trying to hold back tears, but they flowed out uncontrollably. I paid back the money your father owed. I've also had my lawyer negotiate the compensation your family wanted. I checked, and this shouldn't result in a long sentence. He sniffed, his pupils reflecting my emaciated face. With this, you should be able to focus on your treatment. Next, I was the one who was shocked. You didn't have to do this, and I have no money to pay you back. From today on, you can treat me as your husband for another 40 years, and this debt will be cleared. He spoke lightly, smiling as he handed me the ring. Just kidding, Harlan quickly added, this is a voluntary gift, with no strings attached. He smiled, but his eyes glimmered with bitter tears. Why? I looked at him in confusion. Revenge was clearly your goal, and you've accomplished it. My dad is in prison, and I'm suffering from cancer. Shouldn't that be satisfying for you? He stubbornly held the ring box in the air, refusing to put it down. Selena, during these past few months apart, I haven't felt any satisfaction from revenge. Instead, I've suffered immensely every single day. I admit I came close to you at first for revenge, but over these months, I've only thought about two things. 1, how to keep you alive, and 2, how you could forgive me. I smiled faintly, I will live well. I promised my dad. But forgiving you, there's no need. I never hated you to begin with, and I understand your need for revenge. Besides, I once loved you, too. Her final words hung in the air like a chill breeze, settling an unexpected silence. From start to finish, I never hated Harlan, I just didn't know how to face him. Or perhaps, I wasn't sure how to handle everything that had happened. One side was my father, and the other, the man I'd loved for 10 years. You don't hate me? He asked after a moment, his voice trembling slightly, tinged with surprise. No. But we're at the point where our relationship has to come to an end. Keep the ring, it's of no use to me. I pushed his hand back toward his chest, letting my gaze drop to the wedding ring on his finger. And you shouldn't wear that ring anymore. I looked up to meet his sorrowful eyes. Let's part on good terms. I don't hate Harlan, but I also know that I was in love with a version of him that wasn't real. The true Harlan isn't the perfect partner who stood by me for a decade, and so my feelings, too, died with the truth. He clenched his hand tightly around the ring box, gripping it hard. All right. Can we still be friends? He asked. I looked at him, surprised. He quickly explained, I want to make it up to you. Can I still take care of you? If it's possible, I'll consider it. But I don't need your apologies, and I don't need your care. I didn't reject him outright. He didn't have to go to such lengths, but he did anyway. And because of that, I couldn't say no. Harlan seemed like he wanted to say more, but something stopped him. He nodded quietly and finally said, take care and get well soon. The light from the hallway cast a glow over him as he turned, his silhouette blending into the brightness, but somehow, he looked lonelier than ever. Before my surgery, Harlan never showed up again. Just as he promised, my father received a reduced sentence. Even though Harlan wasn't around, traces of him still appeared in my life from time to time. I'd see his television interviews, read news reports about him and his company, or find the meals that arrived at my hospital room each day. Though the nurse and Lewis tried their best to act casual and told me the meals were specially prepared based on my needs, one taste was enough to tell me that Harlan had made them. The nurse nervously watched for my reaction, and when she saw me eating without a hint of suspicion, she subtly sighed in relief. After anesthesia, before I could even open my eyes, I felt the warmth of a tear fall onto the back of my hand. Slowly opening my eyes, I found Harlan crying by my bedside. His eyes were bloodshot, stubble covering his chin, yet I could see the joy in his expression. When he saw I was awake, he quickly turned and wiped his tears. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's all right," I struggled to reply, my voice faint. "The surgery went very well," Harlan's voice trembled. "Did you wait a long time?" I instinctively looked away. "Not that long. Besides, we're friends. If you're having surgery, of course I'd be here for you," he said with a smile, quickly changing the subject. "Does it hurt?" Not wanting me to disagree, he shifted topic swiftly. I shook my head slightly. "I was thinking, when you're discharged, why don't you stay at my place? It's in a good location, convenient for getting around. I've set up smart appliances, so it'll be easy for you to manage on your own. It's ideal for your recovery." Just as I was about to refuse, he added, "Don't worry, I won't be staying there. And it'll be a rental arrangement, you'll pay me rent each month, and once you're fully recovered, I'll take the place back." "Don't be so quick to refuse," he continued, anticipating my reaction. I took a deep breath. "As a friend, you're doing too much. I'm really fine where I am now, but thank you." I gently turned him down, noticing the brief sadness in his eyes. "All right. And you don't have to keep making me meals anymore. You've already paid so much of my father's debt, and now your company's doing well. Don't let yourself get distracted because of me." Harlan looked at me in surprise. "So you knew all along?" "I've wanted to tell you many times, but I knew you wouldn't listen." Just like before, when I refused his help, he would still arrange for the nurse and Lewis to deliver his cooking. "My father already destroyed your family. I don't want you to lose everything you've worked for, because of me." I spoke sincerely, "Harlan, I've let go. I hope you can, too. You've just had surgery. Rest well. I'll visit another day." He didn't respond, forcing a smile as he turned to leave. His hurried departure was filled with silent retreat. Fortunately, Harlan didn't come back, and neither did the meals he made. But stories never end peacefully, and life doesn't either. On my discharge day, Lewis helped carry my luggage to the parking lot. He said he'd arranged a ride for me. As we reached the parking lot, a flash of light blinded me, followed by the roar of a speeding car. I was pushed forcefully to the ground. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the pavement, staring at a pool of blood and a blood-stained car hood. I locked eyes with Harlan. He seemed relieved that I was unharmed before closing his eyes amid the blood. A throbbing pain spread through my body from hitting the ground, but my heart felt gripped, twisting in anguish. Breathing grew difficult as I stumbled toward him, my tears falling onto my clothes and the ground. Standing beside me was Wendy, her forehead bloodied. She collapsed onto Harlan, sobbing uncontrollably, but Lewis quickly pulled her away. Lewis held my shoulders, trying to keep me grounded. "Selena, go get the doctor, hurry." My ears rang with white noise. I don't remember how I ran to get the medical team or how they rushed Harlan into the operating room. All I remember is sitting outside the operating room, feeling like my blood had turned to ice, my heart slowing to a numb, sluggish beat. I imagine that when I went in for surgery, Harlan felt the same sense of helplessness. But unlike Harlan, I didn't get to see him come out. After they took Harlan into surgery, Lewis called the police. The officers arrived quickly, taking Wendy, covered in blood and tears, into custody. As she was led away, she cast a hateful glare at me, accusing my father of taking her parents' lives and blaming me for taking away the man she loved. The police asked Lewis and me to give statements. By the time I rushed back from the station, Harlan was out of surgery. The operation was a success. Harlan's first response upon seeing me unharmed was relief. Was it worth it, nearly losing your life to save me? In that moment, all my emotions surged to the surface. My debt to him only grew. It was worth it, he replied with a small smile, as if the injuries hadn't caused him any pain. Selena, don't feel burdened by it. I wanted to do this willingly, he added. I bit my lip and nodded, forcing back the tears. I knew what he wanted, but unfortunately, it was something I couldn't give. While Harlan was in the hospital, our roles reversed, and I became the one caring for him. But he didn't accept my care as easily as I had with him. He would smile brightly whenever people mistook us for a married couple, only to fall silent when I clarified our relationship. On the day Harlan was discharged, it was also my last day with him. I texted Harlan, sending him a get well soon message. I hoped he could also let go of the past and stop holding on to his old grudges. Days passed by like this. My checkup results were good, and my father's situation in prison was stable, giving me peace of mind. As for Harlan, he continued to appear in the news, thanks to the soaring success of his company. I found a new job and threw myself into a fresh wave of busyness, which inevitably led to social gatherings. However, the host clarified beforehand that alcohol was off limits, which left my colleagues, used to drinking at such events, a bit at a loss. At the dinner, I saw him again, sitting right across from me. Although he wasn't drinking, there was a faint blush on his face. I excused myself, saying I needed to touch up my makeup, but just as I stepped out, he followed close behind. So, not even started talking yet and you're already trying to escape? There was a hint of mischief in his eyes. You know why I left. After all these years, why can't you let go? I had said so much to him when he was in the hospital, and I'd been slowly paying back the money he'd given me all these years. Harlan raised his brows slightly. This collaboration was decided by the company leadership, not something I insisted on. And, he added, the past is behind me now. This partnership is in the company's interest, and I won't back down. He extended his hand, holding a packet of tissues instead of the ring box I once saw there. For when you need to wipe away your tears later. His words were flawless, and his tone and expression gave away nothing, yet he still wore the watch I'd given him years ago. I took the tissues, feigning mild surprise and nonchalance. Let's hope President Fu sticks to his word. He still hadn't let go, and I wouldn't look back. Maybe pretending we're both doing just fine is the best ending for us. Main story ends. Harlan's extra story. Before his parents' accident, Harlan's life had been smooth sailing. But life is like that, tragedy often strikes out of the blue. Their building collapsed in an instant, and his parents were buried beneath the rubble. Harlan clung to his parents' bodies, pulled from the ruins, and fainted in his grief. Now an orphan, Harlan quickly saw his hypocritical relatives turn cold once they learned that most of the family's money had been spent on his mother's illness. With what little savings he had left, Harlan handled his parents' funeral and was sent to an orphanage. It was there he met Wendy, a few years younger than him, and, like him, a victim whose family had been destroyed by shoddy construction. After her father passed away, Wendy's mother was so devastated that she ultimately jumped off a high-rise owned by the real estate company that caused their tragedy. But her death barely made a ripple. For those behind the scenes, it was just a game, not even a mention appeared in the newspapers. That's when Harlan began his plan for revenge, working his way up from the bottom of the enemy's company and gathering evidence, a path that took years and held little chance of success. So, he chose another route, starting with Payne's daughter, Selena. It's almost funny that someone as ruthless as Payne could have such a kind-hearted daughter. Harlan first met Selena in high school during freshman orientation. The school was the best public high school in the city, and Harlan had been accepted based on his excellent grades. On that day, he saw his enemy for the first time in years, suited up, holding Selena's luggage, and smiling kindly. Harlan was volunteering to help freshmen carry their belongings up to the dorms, which had no elevators. Unaware of Harlan's identity, Payne praised him several times during the 20 minutes he spent carrying Selena's luggage. Whether Payne's compliments were genuine or just for show in front of his daughter, Harlan didn't know. But he did know one thing: Payne cared deeply for Selena. In that moment, a detailed plan for revenge unfurled in Harlan's mind. He silenced his conscience and began approaching Selena. Selena was so pure-hearted that she never noticed the calculated nature of their meetings. They met, got to know each other, went to the same university, fell in love, and eventually got married. Everything went smoothly, but every morning, seeing Selena asleep in his arms, he'd find himself lost in thought. The idea of letting it all go crossed his mind more than once. But at the same time, Wendy kept pressing him. She asked him repeatedly whether he had lost himself in this world of luxury. Of course not, Harlan thought. He just felt guilty toward Selena. Though he'd originally committed to this path with a hardened heart, guilt crashed over him like relentless waves, making him wake up in cold sweats in the dead of night. Finally, the day came to close the net. He handed over evidence of Payne's crimes to the police himself. He approached his front door several times but couldn't bring himself to unlock it. He was afraid she would cry, that her tears would seep into his heart, dissolving it bit by bit. He avoided her for 2 months, his mind filled with rehearsed explanations, plans for reconciliation, and ways to make it up to her. But every time he tried to call, he couldn't press the button. Every carefully written message was erased in an instant. Each step toward home ended with him turning back. Unexpectedly, when he finally mustered the courage to return, he found a divorce agreement waiting for him. There was also that medical report he'd carelessly tossed aside. At first, Harlan felt confused, then furious. How could she, who had fallen into his trap, be the one to turn and leave so easily now? That day, he said many cruel things, words that cut so deeply he could never repair the shattered remnants of their family. After Selena left, he retrieved everything he'd once discarded, placing each item back in its spot. But the love he'd so easily thrown away never returned. Selena told him that Wendy was pregnant, hinting sarcastically that it was his child. How could that be? He had always seen Wendy as a younger sister, a fellow survivor from the orphanage. As for the pregnancy, Harlan confronted Wendy that very day, only to find out that she had been secretly posting photos on Instagram, viewable only by Selena. And these pictures, taken every time she visited him under some excuse, led to the latest, a pregnancy test photo. Harlan immediately offered to accompany Wendy for a checkup, and there, in the hospital, he saw Selena. The moment he recognized her, his heart raced, and he even prepared lines in his head to try winning her back. But to his dismay, it was all wishful thinking. Selena wasn't pregnant and looked at him with even more disdain than that morning. What finally broke down the fortress of hatred Harlan had built over the years was a phone call from Morton. Morton revealed everything. Back when his company was on the brink of collapse, the one who had secretly helped him wasn't Morton, it was Selena. All along, Harlan believed he had earned Morton's respect and achieved success on his own. But in reality, without Selena, he'd be nothing. Words of reconciliation filled his heart, giving him the courage to try again. If loving Selena was a crime, then he was beyond redemption. Yet when he rushed to her apartment, he saw her getting out of another man's car. And he recognized him. Lewis looked quite different from his high school days. He'd once run in the school's track meet, where Selena cheered him on. Selena, being kind-hearted, had rallied a group to cheer for him when she learned he was recovering from surgery. Remembering this, Harlan's hands grew clammy with sweat. In that moment, he feared losing her to Lewis more than anything. This terror overtook his rationality, and he ran up and punched Lewis. Selena slapped him back to reality, explaining that Lewis was only there to help her. And then, Harlan saw it, the medical report was real. That day, he had said so many hurtful things, and now, every word was like a boomerang, returning to strike him with a pain that burrowed deep into his heart. He wanted to take care of her, just like before, warming her heart little by little. But each attempt was met with her cold rejection, ending in embarrassing misunderstandings. The only time she was willing to see him was just to make things clear. Selena used to have plenty of admirers, and every time she noticed someone had feelings for her, she would immediately set things straight. Harlan never imagined that one day he would end up as one of them. She had completely given up on him. The burn of alcohol traveled down his throat, searing all the way to his heart. The numbness stayed with his brain, while the bitterness settled deep inside. No one knew how much he drank that night, not even Harlan himself. When he woke up, he was lying in a hospital bed, the smell of antiseptic filling his nose and gradually bringing him back to his senses. The doctor told him he could no longer drink. One more time and his stomach might be ruined. At that moment, Harlan thought to himself, my stomach's ruined too, maybe now I finally understand what she went through. He had shielded Selena during the accident, yet he had actually wished that Wendy had hit and killed him instead. If he had really died for her, maybe she would have pitied him, maybe she would have looked at him one more time. In the endless darkness of his coma, he had heard his parents calling out to him, but on the other end, there was also the sound of her crying. When he regained consciousness, Selena asked him why he did it, why he repaid Payne's debt, why he saved her, even though her father had destroyed his family. He wanted to say he paid Payne's debt because he didn't want to see her cry. The mess he'd caused had already made her sad enough. He also wanted to tell her that he'd lost his home long ago. It was she who made him feel like he had one again. Without her, what home did he even have? But he couldn't say these things, because he knew she no longer loved him. Those past 10 years had been the years when she had loved him most. And every day for the rest of his life would be the days when he loved her the most. When he saw Selena again, she was one of the key representatives for their new business partner. In the dim light of the private room, the soft glow seemed to fall on her and her alone. After so many years, Harlan felt that familiar ache in his chest again. That heart, locked away for so long, could still feel pain. She saw him too. Their eyes met, hers first filled with shock, then quickly looked away. He caught up to her and told her he'd already moved on. He even joked, handing her a tissue, saying, "Don't cry later." But even he didn't believe his own words, he hadn't really let go. Since they broke up, he'd still been living in the same place they once shared, still wearing the clothes she had bought for him. Every anniversary, he remembered. He would go back to the places they used to celebrate, reenacting those moments. He would eat her favorite couple's meal alone, book the couple suite alone, eat an entire birthday cake by himself on her birthday. Had he really let go? He tried to act casual in front of her, but the dampness in his palms and the uneven rise and fall of his chest betrayed him. She took the tissue from him, her fingertips grazing his fingers, a tiny movement that somehow stirred up a storm within him. Selena's eyes curved as she smiled at him, just like that first day in high school when she had thanked him for carrying her luggage. "I hope you mean what you said." Harlan let out a quiet sigh of relief. Thankfully, she hadn't noticed. But as he turned to leave, he suddenly remembered, the watch he was wearing was the one she'd given him all those years ago. He laughed at himself bitterly. So, she had noticed. She just didn't want to expose him, didn't want to shatter the life they had now. Then, without warning, tears welled up in his eyes. But he had no tissues left for himself. The end.